The pregnant waitress spilled coffee on the billionaire CEO, and when he stood up, his voice cut through the stunned silence of the diner. "You're not fired," he said, his eyes locking onto hers. "You're promoted." Elara felt the world tilt on its axis. The tremor had started in her fingers, a subtle, almost imperceptible vibration that had nothing to do with the chill seeping through the cracked window panes of the greasy spoon diner. It was a tremor born of exhaustion, of standing for 10 hours on feet that felt like bags of broken glass. The weight of the baby, a low and constant pressure against her spine, made every movement a negotiation with her own body. She was carrying a pot of fresh coffee, its dark, bitter aroma a familiar torment. For weeks, the smell had made her nauseous, but today she was too tired for nausea. She was just empty, a hollowed-out version of herself, going through motions she no longer had the energy to question. The man sat in the corner booth, the one usually reserved for tourists who didn't know any better. But he was no tourist. His suit was a quiet statement of wealth, a tailored masterpiece of charcoal wool that probably cost more than her entire year's rent. He hadn't looked at the menu. He had simply ordered black coffee and sat, staring out at the rain-slicked street, his profile sharp and thoughtful, against the grimy glass. He exuded a stillness that was alien in this place of clattering plates and shouted orders. It made her nervous. People with that kind of stillness noticed things. They noticed the fraying cuff of a waitress's uniform, the dark circles under her eyes, the faint tremble in her hand. As she approached his table, her worn-out shoe caught on a loose bit of linoleum, a tiny snag, a fractional hesitation, but it was enough. The world shifted into a horrifyingly slow ballet of disaster. The coffee pot tipped in her grasp, a graceful, lethal arc. Time seemed to stretch, to warp. She saw the dark liquid leave the spout, a steaming brown serpent flying through the air. She saw it heading directly for the pristine, light gray fabric of his trousers. Her breath hitched. A silent scream caught in her throat. The coffee made contact with a soft hiss. A dark, ugly stain bloomed instantly on the expensive material. The clatter of the pot hitting the floor was deafening. It shattered, sending ceramic shards and the last of the scalding liquid skittering across the grimy tiles. Silence fell. Every conversation in the diner died. The cook froze at the grill, spatula in midair. The other waitresses stopped, trays held aloft. All eyes were on her, on the mess, on the man in the corner booth. Elara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. This was it. The end. Mr. Henderson, her boss, had a zero-tolerance policy for clumsiness, especially with the rare, high-paying customer. She could already hear his gruff, unforgiving voice. "Pack your things. You're done." Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, hot and shameful. She couldn't afford to be fired. Not now. Not with the baby coming. The stack of unpaid bills on her tiny kitchen table flashed in her mind. The eviction notice tucked beneath them. She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable explosion, but it didn't come from her boss. A low, calm voice spoke. "Are you all right?" Elara opened her eyes. The man was looking at her, not at the ruin of his suit, not at the mess on the floor, but at her. His eyes, the color of warm, dark honey, held no anger, only a startling, unnerving concern. He began to stand, and she flinched back, expecting him to yell, to demand, to call for the manager. Instead, he looked down at her feet, at the puddle of hot coffee spreading dangerously close to her worn sneakers. "Be careful," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "Don't move." Mr. Henderson finally lumbered over, his face a thundercloud of fury. "What in God's name is going on here? Elara, look at this mess. You clumsy girl. Do you have any idea who this is?" Elara's entire body trembled. She couldn't speak. She could only stare at the floor, at the shattered remains of her job, of her fragile stability. The man in the suit turned his calm gaze on Mr. Henderson. The shift was subtle, but the temperature in the diner seemed to drop by 20 degrees. The quiet concern in his eyes was replaced by something hard and unyielding, something that spoke of boardrooms and hostile takeovers, of a power Mr. Henderson couldn't possibly comprehend. "The only thing that needs your attention," the man said, his voice dangerously soft, "is cleaning up this glass before someone gets hurt." Mr. Henderson's jaw worked, but no sound came out. He looked from the powerful man to Elara, his anger deflating into confused obsequiousness. The man then turned his attention back to Elara. She was still frozen, her hand protectively cradling her swollen belly. He saw the sheer terror in her eyes, the paleness of her skin, the way her lip trembled. He saw more than a clumsy waitress. He saw a woman on the absolute edge. It was then that he spoke the words that would shatter her reality far more completely than the coffee pot had. He stood to his full height, a commanding presence in the shabby diner. He looked at Mr. Henderson, then back at Elara, his expression softening once more. "You're not fired," he said, his voice clear and resonant, carrying to every corner of the silent room. He paused, letting the words sink in, letting her absorb the first wave of impossible relief. Then he delivered the final, incomprehensible blow. "You're promoted." The drive was a blur. Elara sat in the passenger seat of a car so luxurious it felt like a spaceship. The leather was soft and smelled faintly of something clean and expensive. The engine was utterly silent. Outside, the rain-streaked streets of the city slid by, a watercolor of muted grays and flashing neon. Inside her head, there was only static. His name was Julian Blackwood. He had handled everything with a swift, quiet efficiency that left no room for argument. He had given Mr. Henderson a crisp $100 bill for the inconvenience, settled his own bill with another, and then, gently but firmly, steered Elara out of the diner before she could protest. He'd simply said, "Come with me. We have things to discuss about your new position." She had followed, dazed and compliant, like a sleepwalker. What else could she do? Argue? Faint? She felt capable of both. Now, sitting beside him, she risked a sideways glance. His profile was even more striking up close. A strong jaw, a straight nose, a brow furrowed in concentration as he navigated the slick city traffic. He had taken off his suit jacket, revealing a crisp white shirt. The coffee stain on his trousers was a dark, jarring reminder of the impossible event that had led her here. "Where are we going?" she finally managed to whisper. Her voice was thin, reedy. "My office is in the main headquarters downtown, but it's not the right place for this conversation," Julian said, not taking his eyes off the road. "We're going to my home. It's quieter there." Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog in her brain. His home? A stranger? A man she had assaulted with hot coffee. Every warning bell her mother had ever instilled in her began to clang in frantic succession. She gripped the door handle, her knuckles turning white. I can't. I should go home. This is a mistake." Julian glanced at her, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes. It wasn't predatory. It was weary, wounded almost. "My 5-year-old daughter and her nanny are at home," he said softly. "You will be perfectly safe, I promise you. I am not. I have no ill intentions. I just want to talk to you, away from prying eyes." The mention of his daughter disarmed her completely. The frantic clanging of the alarm bells subsided into a dull, worried thrum. A man with a 5-year-old daughter wasn't a monster from a news report. He was a father. She relaxed her grip on the door handle, sinking back into the plush leather. She felt a deep, profound exhaustion settle into her bones. She didn't have the strength to fight or to run. For the first time in a very long time, someone else was in control, and a broken part of her was simply relieved. They soon left the cramped city streets behind, moving into a neighborhood where the houses were hidden behind tall hedges and iron gates. The rain had softened to a gentle drizzle, and the world outside the car window was green and lush and impossibly clean. Julian turned the car into a long, winding driveway. At the end of it stood a house. It wasn't a house, it was a statement. A sprawling structure of glass and dark wood and clean, modern lines. It seemed to grow out of the hillside, overlooking a panoramic view of the city skyline, now shrouded in mist. It was beautiful, intimidating, and utterly silent. He led her inside. The interior was even more breathtaking. A vast, open-plan living space with ceilings that soared 2 stories high. One entire wall was glass, looking out onto that same stunning view. The furniture was minimalist and elegant, the art on the walls abstract and expensive. It was the most beautiful place Elara had ever seen, and the loneliest. The silence was immense. It was the kind of silence that absorbed sound, the kind that spoke of emptiness. For all its grandeur, the house felt less like a home and more like a museum. A small, slender woman in a neat gray uniform appeared. "Mr. Blackwood, welcome home. Is there anything you need?" "Thank you, Elena," Julian said. "Could you please bring us some tea in the study, and perhaps some biscuits? This is Elara. She will be my guest." Elena nodded, her professional gaze sweeping over Elara for a fraction of a second. There was no judgment in her eyes, only a mild, professional curiosity. Julian led Elara down a hallway to a room lined with books from floor to ceiling. A large mahogany desk sat before another window, and 2 comfortable-looking armchairs were positioned near a cold, modern fireplace. "Please, sit," he said, gesturing to one of the chairs. Elara perched on the very edge of the cushion, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She felt like a stray cat that had wandered into a palace. Every instinct screamed that she did not belong here. She was a stain on the perfection of this place, just as the coffee had been a stain on his suit. Julian did not sit behind the imposing desk. Instead, he took the other armchair, creating a sense of equality, of intimacy, that made her even more nervous. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his gaze direct and serious. "Elara, I want to apologize for my bluntness back at the diner. I could see you were in distress, and I acted quickly, perhaps too quickly." She shook her head, unable to find her voice. Apologize? He was apologizing to her? "I meant what I said," he continued, his voice low and steady. "I want to offer you a job." A promotion?" she squeaked, the word sounding absurd in her own mouth. A faint smile touched his lips. In a manner of speaking, not as a waitress, I have a feeling that job is not serving you well. Am I wrong? Tears welled in her eyes again. She looked down at her hands, at the swollen knuckles and the chipped nail polish. I need the money, she whispered. The tips I need them for the baby. He nodded slowly, a deep understanding in his eyes. Tell me, Elara, what did you do before you were a waitress? The question caught her off guard. It had been so long since anyone had asked her about her past, about the person she was before survival became her only focus. I was in school, she said, her voice barely audible. For library sciences, I wanted to be an archivist or a children's librarian. A flicker of genuine interest lit up his face. A librarian. I had to drop out, she added quickly, a familiar wave of shame washing over her. Things happened. Elena entered silently with a tray, placing it on the small table between them. The aroma of chamomile tea filled the air. After she left, the silence stretched for a moment. Julian poured 2 cups, his movements precise and graceful. He pushed one toward her. Drink. It will help with the shock. She took the cup, her cold fingers wrapping around the warm porcelain. The simple act of kindness was almost too much to bear. I have a proposition for you, Julian said, his tone shifting to one of business, yet still gentle. I am in need of a personal assistant, but not a corporate one, someone to manage my home life. My schedule is chaotic. I travel a great deal. My daughter Lily, He trailed off, and for the first time, the polished CEO facade cracked, revealing a glimpse of the weary father beneath. My wife passed away 2 years ago, he said, his voice dropping so low she had to strain to hear it. The house has been quiet ever since. Elena is wonderful, but she is staff. Lily needs more. She needs warmth. She needs stories. She needs someone to organize her life, her playdates, her doctor's appointments. Someone with patience and kindness. He looked directly at her, his gaze piercing. When I saw you in that diner, I didn't see a clumsy waitress. I saw the exhaustion of a woman working a job she hates to provide for her child. And when you talked about being a librarian, I saw a person who loves books, who loves order, who loves children. Elara stared at him, her mind reeling. This couldn't be real. It was a dream, a hallucination brought on by low blood sugar and despair. I want to offer you the position of household manager and personal assistant, he said. The salary would be more than enough to take care of you and your baby. There is a suite of rooms on the ground floor, separate from the main house, but connected. You would live here. You would have privacy, security, and medical care. He paused, letting the enormity of the offer sink in. I am not offering you charity, Elara, he said, his voice firm. I am offering you a job, a demanding one. My daughter, she is not easy. She has been through a lot. She is quiet and guarded. She may not accept you at first. This was the catch, the fine print, the child. Why me? She whispered, the question that had been screaming in her mind. You don't know me. I'm a stranger who ruined your suit. Julian looked down at the stain on his trousers, as if noticing it for the first time. He gave a small, wry smile. This is just material. It can be replaced. In my world, I am surrounded by people who want something from me. My money, my influence, my connections. They are polished and perfect, and they never spill anything. They smile while they calculate. He leaned forward again, his expression deadly serious. In the last hour, you have not asked me for a single thing. You have only shown concern, fear, and a quiet dignity. In my eyes, that makes you more qualified than anyone I could find through an agency. I am a good judge of character, Elara. It is the foundation of my success. And my character tells me you are a good person in a bad situation. He stood up. The choice is yours. There is no pressure. You can say no, and I will drive you home. I will still give you enough money to see you through the next few months, no strings attached. He was giving her an out, a way to escape this surreal, intimidating world and return to her own miserable but familiar one. She thought of her cramped, cold apartment. She thought of Mr. Henderson's angry face. She thought of the fear that was her constant companion, a cold knot in her stomach that never went away. Then she thought about her baby. She thought about a safe place to sleep. She thought about warmth. She thought about not having to choose between paying rent and buying food. She looked up at this impossible man, this stranger offering her a lifeline so extravagant it felt like a fantasy. She saw the loneliness in his beautiful, empty house. She saw the shadow of grief in his eyes. He wasn't just offering her a job. He was asking for help. Slowly, unsteadily, Elara stood up. She placed her hand on her belly, the source of all her fear and all her hope. "Okay," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "Yes, I accept." The first week was a study in quiet observation. Elara moved into the ground floor suite, a beautiful set of rooms with its own small living area, a kitchenette, and a bedroom that looked out onto a private garden. It was larger and more luxurious than any apartment she had ever lived in. For the first 2 days, she barely left it, overwhelmed by the feeling that she was an imposter, that at any moment someone would knock on the door and tell her it was all a mistake. Julian gave her space. He left a detailed list of household contacts, schedules, and a credit card for expenses on the kitchen counter. He communicated mostly through polite, formal texts. "Lily has a dentist appointment on Thursday at 3 p.m. The address is in the file. A car will be arranged." The true challenge, the heart of her new role, was not the schedules or the logistics. It was Lily. Julian's daughter was a tiny porcelain doll of a child, with her father's serious eyes and a cloud of dark, curly hair. She moved through the vast, silent house like a ghost. She rarely spoke, communicating mostly with nods and shakes of her head to her nanny, Elena. When Elara first tried to speak to her, Lily simply stared, her expression blank, before turning and walking away. It wasn't malicious. It was a wall, a carefully constructed fortress of silence built around a wound Elara couldn't see. Elara knew she couldn't force her way in, so she watched. She learned that Lily didn't like the crusts on her sandwiches. She learned that she had a favorite blue stuffed rabbit that she took everywhere, its fur worn smooth from years of anxious clutching. She learned that Lily would sit for hours in the library, not reading, but just looking at the pictures in oversized art books, her small finger tracing the shapes of paintings. Elara didn't push. She started with small, non-intrusive acts of care. One afternoon, she found a picture book about a lost star finding its way back to the moon. She left it on the table in the library, open to a beautiful illustration. She didn't say anything. The next day, the book was on a different page. A silent conversation had begun. She noticed that Elena, while efficient, prepared the same rotation of healthy but uninspired meals for Lily. One day, Elara smelled cinnamon and apples wafting from her own small kitchenette. She had been craving baked apples, a simple comfort food from her own childhood. On an impulse, she made a small extra dish with a tiny scoop of vanilla ice cream and asked Elena if she could offer it to Lily for dessert. Elena hesitated, then nodded. Elara brought the bowl into the dining room where Lily was sitting alone at the enormous table, pushing broccoli around her plate. Elara placed the bowl down without a word and began to walk away. A tiny voice, as soft as a whisper of silk, stopped her. "Thank you." It was the first time Lily had spoken to her. Elara's heart swelled. She simply smiled over her shoulder and left the room, giving the child her space. The breakthrough, the true turning point, came a few days later. Elara was in her suite, sorting through a pile of paperwork Julian had left for her, school forms, invitations to charity galas he would not attend, household bills. Her back ached, and she felt a wave of the familiar bone-deep tiredness. There was a faint scratching sound at her door. She opened it to find Lily standing there, clutching her blue rabbit. The child's face was pale, her lower lip trembling. She held out her other hand. In her palm was a small, crudely made bracelet of colored string, its threads tangled and knotted. "It's broken," Lily whispered, her eyes wide with unshed tears. "Mama made it for me." Elara's breath caught in her chest. This was it, a test, an offering of trust. She knelt down, a difficult task with her belly in the way, bringing herself to Lily's eye level. "Oh, honey, let me see." Her fingers, nimble from years of mending her own worn-out clothes, gently took the bracelet. The knot was a mess, but the threads were still strong. "I think," Elara said softly, "I think I can fix this. Would you like to come in while I try?" Lily hesitated for only a second before giving a solemn nod. She followed Elara inside and sat on the small sofa, watching with intense, serious eyes as Elara sat at her table under a lamp. Elara worked slowly, carefully. She found a needle in her small sewing kit and began to patiently pick apart the tangled knot. She didn't talk, sensing that Lily needed the quiet. The only sound in the room was the gentle ticking of a clock and the soft whisper of thread. As she worked, she began to hum, an old, simple lullaby her own mother used to sing to her. She didn't even realize she was doing it. After 10 minutes of painstaking work, she had untangled the threads. She carefully rewove them, tying a new, secure knot at the end. The bracelet looked almost as good as new. "There," she said softly. "All better." She held it out. Lily came forward and allowed Elara to gently tie the bracelet back onto her small wrist. The child looked down at it, then up at Elara. And then she did something that shattered Elara's heart into a million hopeful pieces. Lily leaned forward and wrapped her small arms around Elara's neck in a fierce, sudden hug. She buried her face in Elara's shoulder, her small body trembling slightly. Elara froze for a moment, stunned, before her own arms came up to encircle the child, holding her close. She could feel the warmth of Lily's small body, smell the faint, sweet scent of her hair. She was no longer just an employee. In that moment, she was a comfort, a safe harbor. She didn't know how long they stayed like that. When Lily finally pulled back, her eyes were still serious, but the wall was gone. In its place was a fragile, burgeoning trust. Later that evening, Julian came home late, looking tired. The lines around his eyes were deeper than usual. Elara met him in the main hallway to give him a brief report on the day. "And the caterer for the fundraiser is confirmed," she finished, holding a folder. "Thank you, Elara," he said, his voice distracted as he loosened his tie. How was How was Lily today? It was the question he always asked, tinged with a hope he tried to hide. She was good, Elara said, a real smile spreading across her face for the first time in his presence. She was very good. As Julian walked towards the stairs, he stopped. Lily was standing at the top, in her pajamas, holding her blue rabbit. She was supposed to be in bed an hour ago. "Lilybug," he said, his voice softening. "What are you doing up?" Lily didn't answer. She just walked down the stairs, one slow step at a time, her eyes fixed on Elara. When she reached the bottom, she walked right past her father and stopped in front of Elara. She held up her small hand, displaying the mended bracelet on her wrist. Then she reached out and gently, tentatively, placed her hand on Elara's round belly. Her eyes were full of a quiet, wondering curiosity. Julian watched, frozen. He hadn't seen his daughter initiate physical contact with anyone but him in 2 years. He saw the gentle, accepting smile on Elara's face as she covered Lily's small hand with her own. In the grand, silent hall of his lonely house, a tiny, fragile bridge had just been built. And Julian Blackwood felt a shift deep within his own guarded heart, a tremor of hope he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a very long time. The house had a different rhythm at night. During the day, it was a place of schedules and duties, of silent efficiency. But after Lily was asleep and the staff had retired to their own quarters, the silence changed. It became heavier, filled with unspoken thoughts and lingering sorrows. Elara often found she couldn't sleep. The baby would be active, a gentle, tumbling presence that was both a comfort and a reminder of the uncertain future. On those nights, she would go to her small kitchenette and make a cup of herbal tea, sitting in the dark and watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. One night, lost in thought, she wandered out of her suite and into the main house, drawn to the vast glass wall of the living room. The city was a galaxy of glittering diamonds spread across a black velvet cloth. She wasn't alone. A single lamp was on in the library, casting a warm, golden glow into the cavernous space. Julian sat in one of the armchairs, a glass of amber liquid untouched on the table beside him. He was staring into the cold, empty fireplace, but his gaze was 1,000 miles away. She started to retreat, not wanting to intrude on his private grief, but he must have sensed her presence. "Can't sleep either?" he asked, his voice low and raspy. He didn't turn around. "The baby is practicing its acrobatics," she replied softly, her hand resting on her stomach. He finally turned his head, a faint, sad smile on his face. "I remember that. Sarah, my wife." She said Lily was a little kickboxer. It was the first time he had said his wife's name to her. Sarah. It hung in the air between them, a beautiful, painful ghost. "Come, sit," he said, gesturing to the other armchair. "If you're not tired." She hesitated, then walked slowly into the library and sat down. The space between the chairs felt charged, intimate. "I saw you with Lily earlier," he began, his voice quiet. "With the bracelet. Thank you." "It was just a tangled string," she said, feeling her cheeks flush. "No," he said, shaking his head. "It wasn't. That bracelet is one of the few things she has that her mother made for her. She guards it like a dragon guards gold. For her to bring it to you, for her to let you fix it." He trailed off, looking back at the empty fireplace. She hasn't trusted anyone like that since Sarah died. The confession hung in the air, a gift of vulnerability. Elara felt emboldened to ask a question that had been on her mind. What was she like? Sarah? Julian was silent for a long moment. Elara thought perhaps she had overstepped, but then he began to speak, his voice thick with memory. "She was light," he said. "She was the light in this house. She filled it with laughter and terrible singing off-key. She would have hated how quiet it is now. She was an artist, a painter. She saw color and beauty in everything." He gestured vaguely at the abstract art on the walls. "Most of this was her choice. I just paid for it." He picked up his glass, swirling the liquid. "She was diagnosed when Lily was 2. It was fast, aggressive, 6 months from the first doctor's visit until the end. She was so brave. She spent her last months making things for Lily. Memory boxes, recording her voice reading stories. That bracelet." He took a slow sip. "When she was gone, the light went out. For me and for Lily. I buried myself in work because the silence here was too loud. And Lily, she just stopped talking. She built a wall around herself, and I didn't know how to break through. I had all the money, all the power in the world, and I couldn't fix my own daughter." His voice cracked on the last word. The polished CEO was gone. In his place was just a man, drowning in grief, a widower, a father terrified of his own failings. Elara's heart ached for him, for the little girl asleep upstairs. She knew about walls. She knew about silence. "It's not your fault," she whispered. "Grief is a fortress. You can't tear it down. You can only wait for the person inside to open the gate." He looked at her, his eyes shining with unshed tears in the lamplight. "And how do you know so much about fortresses, Elara?" It was her turn. The air was thick with a shared vulnerability. She took a deep, shaky breath. "My fortress was built by someone else," she began, her voice low and trembling. She looked down at her hands, twisting in her lap. "Lily's father. His name is Mark. We were together for 2 years. In the beginning, he was charming. He was my whole world." She paused, the memories a bitter taste in her mouth. But the charm was a mask. He was a master of control. It started small. Comments about my friends, my clothes. He convinced me to drop out of my library sciences program. He said he would take care of me, that I didn't need a career. He isolated me, slowly, piece by piece, until he was the only person I had left. Then the anger started. Not physical, not at first. It was a word, a look, the way he would punch the wall next to my head. He made me feel small, worthless. He told me I was lucky to have him, that no one else would ever want me. She had to stop, to swallow the lump in her throat. Julian listened, his expression hardening, his earlier sadness replaced by a cold, still anger. But it wasn't directed at her. "When I found out I was pregnant," she continued, her voice barely a whisper, "I was terrified, but a part of me was also hopeful. I thought a baby would change him, soften him." She let out a hollow, bitter laugh. "I was so naive, it made him worse. The jealousy, the paranoia. He accused me of trapping him. One night he came home drunk. He got angry. He shoved me. I fell. It wasn't a hard fall, but I was so scared for the baby." Tears streamed down her face now, silent and hot. "That was the moment I knew I couldn't bring a child into that world. That night, while he was passed out, I packed a single bag with anything I could grab, and I left. I took the little cash I had saved, and I just ran. I've been bouncing between shelters and cheap motels ever since. The job at the diner was the most stable thing I'd had in months." She finally looked up at him, her eyes blurry with tears, feeling raw and exposed. "So, you see," she whispered, You hired a coward who ran away, a broken, stupid girl who fell for the wrong man." Julian leaned forward and, with a startling gentleness, he reached out and placed his hand over hers. His touch was warm and firm, a steady anchor in her storm of shame. "No," he said, his voice a low, fierce rumble. "I see a survivor. I see a woman who found the courage to save her child. You didn't run away, Elara. You escaped. There is a world of difference between those two things. What you did was the bravest thing in the world." His words were a balm on wounds she didn't even know were still bleeding. He didn't see her as broken. He saw her as brave. They sat there in the quiet library. In the middle of the night, two wounded souls bound by their shared confessions. The wall of glass showed their reflections. A man who had lost his light, and a woman who was terrified of her own shadow. His hand remained over hers, a silent promise of safety, of understanding. In the shared darkness, a new, tentative connection was forged. It was no longer about a job, or gratitude, or pity. It was a bond of two people who had seen the worst of life, and were, together, daring to hope for something more. The silence in the house no longer felt empty. It felt watchful, waiting. The fragile peace was shattered by a photograph. It appeared in a glossy tabloid magazine, the kind Elara saw in the checkout aisle of the grocery store. Julian was on the cover, a grainy, long-lens shot of him entering a restaurant. The headline was salacious. "Billionaire widower, Julian Blackwood's new mystery woman." And there, just behind him, blurred but unmistakable, was Elara. Her pregnant form was silhouetted against the restaurant's bright doorway. Her blood ran cold. She saw the magazine while running errands, her heart seizing in her chest. She bought it, her hands shaking so badly she could barely get the money out of her wallet. Back in the safety of her car, she stared at the photo. It was just a picture. It meant nothing, but she knew it meant everything. Mark would see this. The thought was a bolt of pure, ice-cold terror. He wouldn't know Julian's name, but he would see the word billionaire. He would see her, and he would come. Like a shark smelling blood in the water, he would come for the money, for her. The fortress of safety she had so carefully begun to build crumbled to dust. The fear she thought she had escaped came roaring back, a tidal wave of panic that left her breathless. She had to run. She couldn't let him find her here. She couldn't bring his darkness into this house, into Lily's life. She owed Julian that much. She owed him protection from her own toxic past. That night, her mind was a whirlwind of frantic planning. She packed the same small bag she had arrived with. It felt heavier this time, weighted down with all the hope she was about to leave behind. She wrote a short, tear-stained letter to Julian, trying to explain, trying to thank him. Words felt hollow, inadequate. She wrote about his kindness, about Lily, about how she could never repay him. She ended with a simple, heartbreaking lie. "A family emergency has come up, and I must go home immediately. I am so sorry." Her plan was to wait until the house was asleep, then slip out the back gate and call a cab to the bus station. From there, she would go. Somewhere, anywhere. She would disappear again. Just after midnight, with the letter clutched in her hand, she crept out of her suite. The house was dark and silent. Her heart hammered against her ribs with every step. She made it to the main foyer, her hand on the heavy front door, when a light flicked on. Julian stood at the bottom of the stairs, wearing a simple t-shirt and sweatpants. He wasn't angry. He just looked impossibly tired and deeply, deeply sad. He was holding a copy of the same magazine. "You were going to leave without saying goodbye," he said. It wasn't a question. Elara flinched, caught. The letter in her hand felt like a confession of guilt. She couldn't speak. A sob was lodged in her throat. "His name is Mark, isn't it?" Julian said softly, taking a step toward her. "You're afraid he'll see this and come for you." She could only nod, tears finally spilling over and running down her cheeks. "I can't let him," she choked out. "I can't let him ruin this, ruin you, ruin Lily. You don't deserve my mess." "Your mess?" Julian's voice was low, but it held a new, hard edge, an edge of steel. "Elara, look at me." She forced herself to meet his gaze. The sadness was still there, but it was overshadowed by a fierce, unwavering resolve. "You are not a mess. You are a part of this house now. You are a part of our lives, Lily's and mine." He took another step, closing the distance between them. "I told you that you escaped. You are not running again, not ever." "You don't understand what he's like," she whispered, shaking her head. "He's cruel. He's manipulative. He will try to hurt you, to take your money, to use me to get to you." "Let him try," Julian said, and the words were not a boast. They were a promise, a chilling, absolute statement of fact. "I have spent my life building a fortress of a different kind, one made of lawyers and contracts and influence. He has no idea what he would be walking into." He gently took the bag from her hand and set it on the floor. Then he took the crumpled letter from her other hand. He didn't read it. He just held it. "This is your home now, Elara," he said, his voice softening again, his gaze intense. "This is your safe place, and I will burn the world to the ground before I let anyone or anything threaten you or our children in this home." Our children. The word struck her with the force of a physical blow. Her baby, his daughter, our children. He reached out and gently wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "I am not asking you to be brave right now. I am just asking you to trust me. Let me handle this. Let me be the protector. Will you do that? Will you stay?" It was a choice. Stay and face the monster she had run from, or flee back into the lonely darkness. But this time, she wouldn't be facing it alone. She would be standing behind a man who looked at her not as a liability, but as someone precious to be defended. She looked into his eyes, into the eyes of the man who had pulled her from the wreckage of her life, who had seen her worth when she saw none in herself. She saw the father who grieved for his daughter's silence. She saw the man who had confessed his own wounds to her in the dead of night. And for the first time, she didn't feel like a victim. She felt defended. She gave a slow, shaky nod. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll stay." A profound relief washed over Julian's face. He pulled her into a gentle hug, his arms a circle of strength and safety around her. She rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady, reassuring beat of his heart. The storm was coming. She knew it. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't facing it alone. She was standing in the eye of the hurricane, and it was the safest place she had ever been. The call came 2 days later. Julian's personal phone, a number known by less than a dozen people, rang while they were in the kitchen. Lily was at the table, diligently drawing, while Elara made them all sandwiches. Julian was leaning against the counter, watching them with a quiet smile. It was a scene of such simple, domestic peace. The phone's ring was a harsh intrusion. Julian glanced at the screen. The number was blocked. His expression hardened. "Elara, take Lily into the garden for a few minutes," he said, his voice calm but with an underlying command. Elara knew. Her blood turned to ice. This was him. Mark. She nodded, her face pale. "Come on, sweetie," she said to Lily, her voice miraculously steady. "Let's go see if the roses have bloomed." As she led the little girl outside, she heard Julian answer the phone, his voice a flat, neutral tone. Blackwood. She didn't hear the rest. She slid the glass door shut behind her, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She tried to focus on Lily, on the beauty of the garden, but her mind was in the kitchen, with Julian and the voice from her past. Inside, Julian listened as the oily, arrogant voice he had been expecting filled his ear. "Well, well, Mr. Blackwood," Mark sneered. "Big shot CEO. I see you've picked up my leftovers." She always did have a habit of landing on her feet. Julian's knuckles were white where he gripped the phone. He remained silent, letting the man talk, letting him reveal his intentions. "Here's the deal," Mark continued, his voice dripping with false confidence. "I'm a reasonable guy. My girl is carrying my kid, and she's living in your palace. That seems a little unfair, doesn't it? I think I deserve some compensation for my emotional distress." "How much?" Julian asked, his voice devoid of any emotion. Mark laughed, a greasy, unpleasant sound. "Smart man. Let's start with $1 million. A nice round number. A small price to pay to keep your little home life out of the papers. I've got stories about Elara that wouldn't look too good for your company's image. You understand? Blackmail. Crude and predictable." "I see," Julian said, his voice still dangerously calm. "Let me be very clear, so that we don't have a misunderstanding. You will not receive $1 single from me. Not now, not ever." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Mark was clearly not expecting this. "You think I'm bluffing? I'll go to every newspaper, every blog. I'll tell them she's a mentally unstable gold digger who trapped you with a baby that's probably not even yours." Julian walked over to the window, watching Elara as she knelt down to show Lily a ladybug on a leaf. He saw the gentle curve of her back, the protective way her hand rested on her belly. A fierce, cold rage, unlike anything he had ever felt, settled in his chest. "First," Julian said, his voice dropping to an icy whisper, "if you ever again question the paternity of that child, a child I already consider my own, I will unleash a level of legal and financial ruin upon you that you cannot possibly imagine. Your great-grandchildren will feel the effects." "Second," he continued, not giving Mark a chance to respond, "while you were making your pathetic threats, my security team was tracing this call. They have been tracking your digital footprint ever since that magazine article was published. We have records of your threatening emails to Elara from months ago. We have a copy of the police report from the night she fell. We have testimony from 2 of your ex-girlfriends detailing a similar pattern of abuse and coercion." The silence on the other end was now one of dawning horror. "A man from my legal team is, as we speak, standing outside your apartment door with a restraining order. It forbids you from coming within 500 feet of Elara, Lily, or any of my properties. It forbids you from contacting her or me in any way. If you violate it, you will go to jail immediately. If you speak her name to any media outlet, you will be sued for defamation so comprehensively that you will never own a bank account again." Julian paused, letting the weight of his words crush the other man. "You are a small, cruel man who preys on the vulnerable," Julian finished, his voice like the crack of a whip. But Elara is no longer vulnerable. She is under my protection. This is the one and only warning you will receive. Are we clear? A strangled, squeaking sound came from the phone. Yes, Mark whispered, his arrogance completely shattered. Julian hung up without another word. He stood there for a moment, his breathing deep and steady, the cold rage slowly receding, replaced by the firm resolve of a protector who has neutralized a threat. He slid the glass door open. Elara looked up, her face a mask of anxiety. "It's over," he said softly. She stood up, searching his face. What? What did he say?" "He said what bullies always say," Julian replied, walking towards her. And I explained to him, in terms he could understand, that he had made a grave error. He stopped in front of her, his gaze gentle. "He will not bother you again, ever. I promise." The finality in his voice was absolute. Elara stared at him, at this powerful, decent man who had used his strength not for revenge, but for her protection. He had built a wall around her, not of stone and glass, but of unwavering loyalty. Tears filled her eyes, but for the first time they were not tears of fear or sadness. They were tears of overwhelming, gut-wrenching relief. The monster from her past was gone. Vanquished, she was finally, truly free. She threw her arms around his neck, burying her face in his shoulder, and sobbing. "Thank you," she cried, the words muffled by his shirt. "Thank you." He held her tightly, his hand stroking her hair. "There is nothing to thank me for," he murmured into her ear. "You are family." Lily, who had been watching this emotional exchange with her wide, serious eyes, walked over. She tugged on Julian's trousers. "Daddy," she said, her small voice clear and certain. "Is Elara crying because she's happy?" Julian looked down at his daughter, then at the woman in his arms. He smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Yes, Lilybug," he said. "She's crying because she's happy." The weeks that followed were filled with a quiet, blossoming joy. With the shadow of Mark lifted, Elara bloomed. The fear that had been her constant companion for so long was gone, replaced by a lightness she hadn't felt in years. Her laughter, at first tentative, became a frequent sound in the once silent house. She filled the kitchen with the smells of baking. She read stories to Lily in the library with animated voices, and she helped Julian organize his chaotic life with a gentle competence that he came to rely on completely. The house was no longer a museum. It was a home. Julian found himself rushing back from the office, eager to return to the warmth that now filled the space. He loved watching Elara and Lily together, their heads bent over a puzzle, or their laughter echoing from the garden. He saw the color returning to Elara's cheeks, the confidence in her posture. He saw her not as a project he had saved, but as a partner who was saving him from his own loneliness. The bond between them deepened, moving beyond shared trauma and gratitude into something tender and profound. A shared look across the dinner table, a lingering touch as he handed her a file, a late-night conversation that had nothing to do with the past and everything to do with a possible future. One sunny Saturday afternoon, the three of them were in the garden. Lily was trying to teach Elara how to fly a kite, her small face serious with concentration. Elara, now heavily pregnant and not particularly agile, was laughing as the kite repeatedly nose-dived into the grass. Julian sat on a bench, watching them. He saw Elara, her face flushed with happiness, her hand resting on the swell of her belly where his child, he never thought of the baby any other way, was growing. He saw his daughter, Lily, chattering and laughing, a sound that was still a precious miracle to him. He saw his family, a beautiful, unconventional, perfectly imperfect family, and he knew, with an unshakable certainty, what he had to do. That evening, after Lily was asleep, he found Elara in the library, shelving some books. "Elara," he said, his voice uncharacteristically nervous. "Can we talk for a moment?" She turned, a smile on her face. "Of course. Is everything all right?" He walked towards her, stopping just a few feet away. He didn't know how to begin. All his boardroom confidence, his skills of negotiation, failed him. So he spoke from the heart. "When you first came here," he began, his voice low, "this house was just a structure, a beautiful, empty shell. I was just a man going through the motions of living. And then you arrived, you and this baby." He gestured to her belly. "You filled this house with warmth, with life, with hope." He took a deep breath. "You didn't just become a part of the household, Elara. You became the heart of it. You healed Lily, and you healed me in ways I didn't even know I was broken." Elara's smile faltered, replaced by a look of wide-eyed wonder as she realized where this was going. Her heart began to beat faster. "I no longer want you to be my employee," Julian said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't want you to live in the guest suite. I want you to live in this house as my partner, as my equal, as my wife." He took another step, his eyes pleading with her to understand. "I know this is fast. I know your past has made you wary of promises, but my promise is this. I will spend the rest of my life protecting you, cherishing you, and loving you. I love you, Elara." Tears welled in her eyes as the simple, powerful words washed over her. Before she could answer, a small voice came from the doorway. "Are you asking Elara to be our new mommy?" They both turned. Lily stood there, clutching her blue rabbit, her eyes wide. Julian's face softened. "Yes, Lilybug, I am." Lily looked at Elara, her expression serious. She walked over and took Elara's hand. "You should say yes," she said, with all the solemn wisdom of a 5-year-old. "Then you and the baby can stay here forever, and you can fix all the broken things." Elara looked from Lily's earnest face to Julian's hopeful one. Fix all the broken things. The child's simple words held the entire truth of their journey. They had all been broken in their own ways, and together they had begun to mend. Tears of pure happiness streamed down Elara's face. She squeezed Lily's hand and looked at Julian. Her heart so full, it felt like it might burst. She was no longer the broken, fearful woman from the diner. She was strong. She was loved. She was home. "Yes," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, Julian, I will marry you." A radiant smile broke across Julian's face. He closed the remaining distance between them and pulled her and Lily into a group hug. The three of them stood there, a circle of love in the quiet library, their separate broken pieces finally fitting together to form a beautiful, whole family. The epilogue was not a grand affair. There was no lavish wedding with hundreds of guests. Instead, there was a simple ceremony in the garden, under a canopy of white roses. Julian, handsome in a dark suit. Elara, radiant in a simple, cream-colored dress that flowed over her baby bump. And Lily, the flower girl, who took her role with the utmost seriousness, scattering petals with determined focus. The only guests were Elena, the nanny who had become a friend, and a few of Julian's closest, most trusted colleagues. The vows they exchanged were not flowery or poetic. They were simple, direct promises. Promises of loyalty, of safety, of partnership. Promises to build a life together, to cherish their children, to always be each other's safe harbor. When Julian slid the simple, elegant diamond band onto Elara's finger, she looked at the drawing that was framed and sitting on a small table nearby. It was the one Lily had made weeks ago. A stick-figure family of a man, a woman with a circle on her tummy, and a little girl holding their hands. A child's wish, now a reality. A few months later, the house was filled with a new sound, the cries and coos of a newborn baby. They named him Leo. He had Elara's gentle eyes and Julian's determined chin. One quiet Sunday morning, Elara sat on a blanket in the garden, Leo asleep in her arms. Lily was beside her, carefully arranging dandelions into a crown. Julian came out of the house, carrying a tray with mugs of tea and a plate of the cinnamon apple pastries that had become a family favorite. He sat down beside her, pressing a kiss to her temple. "How are my favorite people doing?" he murmured. "We're perfect," she whispered, looking from the sleeping baby in her arms to the happy girl beside her, to the loving man at her side. The journey had started in the wreckage of a shattered coffee pot, in a moment of absolute despair. It had been a path paved with fear, trust, and shared wounds, but it had led her here, to this moment of profound, unshakable peace. She was no longer defined by her trauma. She was a wife, a mother, a protector in her own right. She was not the broken girl who had spilled coffee on a stranger. She was the woman who had built a family from the pieces. Because sometimes the things that feel like they are breaking you are actually just breaking you open. Open to a life more beautiful than you ever could have imagined.